Good morning and welcome to Moments with Melinda. I am your host, Melinda Moulton, and today I have with me Brian Pine. Brian, how are you?
Doing well, Melinda. Thank you. How are you?
Thank you so much for being on my show. Let me tell my viewers a little bit about you because you and I go way back. I think we go back almost 40 years, which would make us in our 30s. Long time ago. Well, not you. You would have been in your early 20s. But anyway, let me tell my viewers about you. Okay, so Brian Pine is the Director of Community and Economic Development for the City of Burlington. For 18 years, Brian was the Assistant Director for Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization in CEDO. He also worked as a senior consultant at VEIC, the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, and started his own consulting firm, Pine Consulting, that assists nonprofit and public sector organizations with project planning, financing, and development. Brian also served as a Ward 3 City Councilor from 1991 to 1995 and was elected again in 2018. How's that?
Excellent.
Did I miss anything?
You've covered the most of it, I
No,
think.
I think I missed one of the most important things, and that's that you are married to Liz Curry.
That is true. I would not want to minimize that fact. That is an important fact in who I am.
And that
Absolutely.
and that is one great woman who's been by your side for a long time. So let's start at the beginning, Brian. Can you talk to us a little bit about where you were born and your childhood?
Sure. I was born in a small town in the Catskills called New Paltz, which is known by many as the home of the Shwangunks, which is also called the Gunks for rock climbers, but also is has some level of notoriety as a SUNY New Paltz has been in operation, started originally as a teachers' college in the 1800s. And my family's arrival in New Paltz, we think, was either right around the late 1700s, and they were farmers and farmed up on the mountain and did that until farming became much less viable, moved into town, ran a livery stable, and eventually one of the livery stable customers couldn't pay off his debt, and he handed my great great grandfather embalming equipment and said, "You might want to take this instead." And so we went into the funeral business in 1892, and it lasted until 1993 was my family business. I grew up at the funeral home, literally. It was in my backyard. I lived in the house that my great grandfather built, and my grandmother and my great grandmother and my uncle lived next door. So we had this huge extended family and compound that was central to the village of New Paltz. So I felt like I was a product of being part of the fabric of that community in a unique way because of the funeral home presence meant that virtually every family at some point was going to end up coming to the Pines. And they were often very sad moments, but the role of being in that position in a small town meant a great deal to the members of my family. I witnessed it. I felt it. I saw the sadness on my grandmother's face when she had to deal with all the the grief of community members, and it's had a everlasting effect on who I am.
That's fascinating. Absolutely, and a perspective on death as well. But that made you and your family pretty much the center of community life in your town, which really explains a lot about how you are the center of the community in Burlington, Vermont.
Yeah, what we didn't know is that my father's grandfather, so V.T. Pine, Vanderlyn Thomas Pine, was a very involved politician, and this is a different type of republicanism because he started a town welfare program during the Depression because he saw people around him were struggling. And in fact, his brother, Austin James Pine, had moved off to Mobile, Alabama, and he was struggling so badly that he would send occasionally a piece of string to represent his waist shrinking from basically from hunger, his own brother. And so my great grandfather created a town welfare program in a time when folks were really struggling to make ends meet and just take care of their basic needs. And so it was a time when republicanism meant something very different. And they were also from a Quaker background, so they had they just had a simple life, even they were doing decently well in the village. They lived a simple life among their neighbors, and attended to the needs of families when they were going through a very difficult time. I should mention both my parents my dad was a professor. He had gone to Dartmouth and ended up finishing at NYU as for his PhD in sociology. My mother, when my parents split up, was back at college at Goddard actually, and she was doing a Goddard program where she went up for a week every semester. It was the adult degree program, and she got her teaching certificate and then went on to get two master's degrees and taught for 35 years in the public schools in that area. So that's my.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So, who do you think was your greatest inspiration and who guided you in their own life to get into public service?
Well, in so many ways, my grandmother was my greatest inspiration, really. She was my rock. She was my person. I would go and sit on her back porch. It was screened in, and we would spend lots of summers just visiting with each other. And I just gathered so much from her. And she's a remarkable person. I could tell, we could talk the whole show about that. It'd be very
Well,
interesting.
anyways,
But
that's so good to know.
I would say that she just instilled in me and my brothers, and I believe my stepsisters as well, who showed up about 10 years later from the time I was born, and instilled in us just a deep, deep kindness and respect for people that is just the way you're supposed to be. It's just a natural thing. It was so easy and natural. I think it comes naturally because you get so much benefit from it, which she used to say, the kinder you are, the kinder the world will be to you. And that was just, yeah, kind of pretty amazing.
That's so true, Brian. Well, that explains a lot about your disposition. So, what brought you to Vermont?
University of Vermont. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to study, although I knew I needed to be here. So I was fortunate to go to a boarding school in Lake Placid, and it was close enough to Burlington that we would come over for school events. We'd come to concerts now and then, and I knew that this is where I had to be. I just had a real feeling. So I applied to only two schools, UVM and St. Michael's College. I'm coming to Burlington no matter what. It's just a question of which school will have me.
Oh my God. Well, I'm glad. Well, I'm glad you came here because you've done so much for the city. So talk to us, Brian, a little bit about your early days in the Bernie administration back in the 1970s and your work with some of the great folks that came out of that movement.
I arrived in 1981, and Bernie had just been elected in March, and I arrived that August. I didn't have any sense of how important and how much of a movement was beginning to form in Burlington. That Bernie was, the primary rallying force around that movement until just a few months into my time at the University of Vermont, it became obvious that the students who were activists in the areas of political activism that I was most attracted to were all very engaged with local politics. And I understood the national and the international stuff. I didn't know that at the local level, you could have elected leaders who actually really cared about these issues of social and economic and environmental justice. And they were implementing ideas. They were actually doing the work at the local level. So I got very involved in door-to-door campaigning on campus for Bernie in '82. Probably was my first campaign. I became a notary public, and I went around and registered dozens and dozens of students with friends, and it became a key part of that coalition that coalesced around Bernie's vision for a more just society. And it was we were able to, that slogan, it always said think globally, act locally. Well, we could actually do that in Burlington, and we could actually get stuff done. And so it was so incredibly inspiring to see what, he had opened up the doors of city government. He had Jim Rader as the clerk, and Jim was completely committed to, citizen activism, citizen engagement, basically a civic approach to government that really invited people in and made it possible for folks to take the information that was important to what it was to run a city and digest it and have meaningful opportunities for engagement. The neighborhood planning assemblies were coming together. CEDO was being formed. It was just an incredibly heady time. And that's probably when I first met you, because the Alden plan was where we probably came together. And
Right.
you
Which
know, I was,
which
which didn't come to fruition, but it was a brilliant moment, really.
It was a brilliant moment, and Bernie supported it, and we got 100% support in every level until we went for the bond vote, and we got 56%.
Right.
But we needed two-thirds. But in retrospect, I'm really glad that we didn't do the Alden plan because we probably would have really gone belly up because of the
Well, I love that you immediately said within a year or two of it not getting supported, you said, you know what? We're going to do the incremental approach that Burlington seems to be ready for. That's what we're going to do. So you just pivoted. It was brilliant. You and Lisa just pivoted. You just immediately said, it's clear. I actually sat in this office right after the bond vote because Peter decided he was going to hire a bunch of people to do a telephone survey. And we literally called hundreds and hundreds of Burlington voters and asked them, what do you want? Why did you vote it? You're right. It was over half. It was 56% or something. But
yeah.
why did we not get to the two-thirds? And it was clear that people thought it was just a little too big, a little too much, a little too.
It wasn't local. It was all this Ben Thompson.
That's
It
true.
was
That's
helicopters and big money and the
yes.
17 banks we brought together. And it was just, and it was men. It was all
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
I was, and at the end of the day, it ended up in the hands of two women, and our motto became two women with a vision for equity and inclusion on the waterfront. But anyway,
Yes.
enough about that. Thank
Yeah.
you for
Yeah.
being a supporter of that. So talk to us a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing since you became the CEDO director in 2021, like the Resource and Recovery Center, the Trusted Community Voices Program, the Memorial Auditorium Redevelopment Project, and why TIF tax incrementing financing is so important to spur development and growth in the city. Talk to us a little bit about your job and what you're doing and what's
Sure.
important to you.
Yeah. When I came back, I had worked at CEDO from summer of 1996 until early 2015 in various roles, but primarily with a housing and neighborhood revitalization. I did work on some TIF related stuff. I did some work with Bruce that was related to your project on the waterfront, the gorgeous building that I was just in this weekend. Talk about vibrancy. That's just a key piece. But so I came back after a hiatus. I was gone from 2015 until 2021, early 2021, I'd say Marchish. Mayor Weinberger asked me if I would consider coming back as the director. And I did have to think about it because I was enjoying my work as a consultant. It was very interesting to work with communities all over the state. But I also had to acknowledge this is the work I really need to do and want to do. Feel incredible passion. Feel like we were coming out of COVID, but it was going to be a slow, gradual recovery process. And what incredible honor. There's no higher honor than public service doing the work you want to do in the community you love. To me, there's nothing better. So it took a little while to get me on board, but once I did, I was pretty excited. I started in June of 2021. When I came back to the building, to City Hall, there was almost nobody here. People were not working in the building at that point, which I didn't really care for too much. That was not what I envisioned being the work environment. And so I immediately tried to rebuild the team. And in doing so, I did acknowledge the work that had been done around the Resource and Recovery Center, which was really intended to be the city's way to provide Burlingtonians, both residents and businesses and nonprofits and even visitors coming to see our wonderful city, provide them with access to resources and information to help navigate this just immediately post-pandemic world that we were in. And the Trusted Community Voices, bringing together representatives from immigrant and refugee communities to not only give them the information, but to have them provide. It was a two-way exchange. It was not just a one-way street. And so the Trusted Community Voices became a flagship program of our department. We also ended up taking on a much more robust role with respect to homelessness. And we brought on a person whose job it was to work on homelessness, which was the first time we had a dedicated staff person. And bringing on Sarah Russell in 2022, that was a very significant moment. And I think people will look back and realize that if we had not done that, people have said, well, you created this effort to end homelessness, and look, we've only gotten a bigger problem. Well, if we had not done that, things would be so much worse. So I think it's really important to remember, we took the city property on Elmwood Avenue, just north of the federal building and the post office. We converted a parking lot into shelter for 35 households or individuals mostly, because they're not families living there, it's individuals. And it has been a model that has led to permanent housing for over 25 people have moved on from that shelter in the 3 years since we've been operating. Actually, it's only 2 years since we've been operating. Um, and so those are the types of efforts. Now, with our downtown, we had, at the time when I arrived, there was a lawsuit between Don Sinex and the city, and there was no progress. There was no construction happening. We had nothing going except litigation, basically. We brought in a basically a development consultant to work with the city and to work with Don Sinex and his group. And eventually we led to not just a resolution to the litigation and a settlement, but the sale of the project to local people who
Mhm.
had passion. They had the resources, they had the vision. They were so committed. Dave Farrington, Scott Ireland, Al Senecal, and their project manager, Patrick O'Brien, it's a dream team as far as getting something done. And so we went from a stalled project, which was threatening to really hamstring our downtown and our recovery, to a really successful development team that's pulling it off. And they're going to open up this summer, the first
Yeah.
phase of the project. So without, though, I would say the TIF project in that case it was essential in order to reclaim those streets, in order to reconnect our streets, which were closed off during urban renewal. And that was a very painful piece of our history, which you're going to cover in your future endeavor with the Culture and History Museum, I'm sure. We'll cover what we did to our own community as a community in an effort to do something positive, though. I really think it's important to acknowledge we thought at the time that was what we needed. And in hindsight, it was some huge mistakes were made in urban renewal, displacing whole groups of people. And so reconnecting those streets isn't just about making a development that's commercially viable for City Place to happen, but it's really healing that damage and that harm that was caused in the 60s when we tore down an entire neighborhood and rebuilt it with a mall.
Here, here.
So I
And,
think that,
and also UDAG money. I mean, there was all that urban
yes,
development grant money that was
yes,
flowing into cities, and they just did some really terrible things with it.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So let's move on to talking about the state of Burlington. And as you know, I've written a couple of commentaries for Digger about this and telling people to come on, get down to Burlington and support our Queen City. But talk to us a little bit about why it's important for folks to shop, eat, and recreate in the Queen City, and focus a bit on some of the issues that are facing the city, which have had an effect on people wanting to come downtown. And let's get this out there, Brian.
Sure. I think the important piece to remember is that the vast majority of downtown businesses are locally owned businesses. People often think that we have a lot of chains downtown. We have a very small number of, and in matter of fact, some of the chains are locally owned chains if we have chains. So there's a huge benefit to circulating your dollars in your community. I think it's fairly well understood. It's certainly well proven that when you support local, it supports a more healthy, vibrant community. It supports those families that are relying on those businesses, and the workers who work in those jobs are, certainly able to survive and get by and recirculate that money in the economy. So there's a huge multiplier benefit of supporting local. Obviously, if we support local in our downtown, we're going to, show that there's sufficient demand. Well, we never, for many years, for almost 30 years, we didn't have a hardware store until City Hardware showed up. And I believe that the new City Place development will bring enough people and enough activity that places like hardware stores will have, a more firm footing in our downtown. And once you have more people downtown living and visiting, you have the sort of the cycle or the multiplier effect of increased activity and increased vitality. If you look at when you have big events downtown, the issues that are struggling for people who are struggling with mental health issues and with substance use disorder and with chronic homelessness, those issues will continue to be issues we have to deal with. But when you have a preponderance of folks downtown and you kind of dilute and mix things up a bit, and you have people from different backgrounds frequenting the downtown, you can't help but notice that it's very different when there's something, going on downtown. Like when the eclipse happened, downtown Burlington was incredibly exciting place to be. It was it was really, you could almost feel the excitement to be downtown.
Well, that's why events are important.
That's
And
right.
you also have city markets. So to my viewers, I'm going to, and Brian and I want you to know this. Go to Burlington. All those restaurants are owned by Vermonters, and they're people who work there are Vermonters. And Church Street is vibrant, and the waterfront's vibrant. And come on back to Burlington because we need you. We need you to embrace the city, and come on down. Now, another issue I know that's come up recently, Brian, is the infrastructure and the street closures and detours. The Main Street project, is underway until the end of November 2026. But this work is important. And I want my viewers to understand this because this is an upgrade of a system that is 100 years old. And this is, we're got all this infrastructure money and it's going into the city. And it's going to be great when it's done. But talk to us a little bit about that, Brian.
Sure. It should just be noted that work has been needed for decades. We just never had the ability to pull it off. And so with our downtown tax increment financing district, that's what made it possible. That's how we're funding this project. And the voters approved it because the voters were convinced that this was what we needed to do. I think every time we make a case to the voters about the future, the sustainability, protecting our lake, ensuring that we have adequate facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists, and we have a healthy, thriving downtown. People want that badly. They will always support that, I believe. And I think we've shown that we bring it to the voters and we show them, the vision, and the voters will support it because they know that our future is dependent on investing in key infrastructure that ensures the future of our city. And I think that's
Absolutely.
what we're seeing right now is very challenging. It is very challenging for small businesses who their bottom line is hit by the lack of traffic. It's we can't deny that. I would hope that we can find a way to sort of mitigate that impact and make it so that they can make it through. Because we certainly don't want any business who was here when we started at the project to not be able to survive till the end. Like that's that should be our goal is everyone is still here at the end of the project.
Well, I'm sure if anybody can figure that out, you can, whether it's a reduction in taxes or whatever, you'll figure that out. But I think it's very important for people to understand that this is an upgrade for the city that'll last for the next 100 years. I just want to give a shout out too about the Legacy Project. I would love to see the city bring back that document that went out 20 years, which was 2020. Because we're way beyond that, but I'd love to see that come back. So let's talk a little bit about the current state of affairs in our country. The work Bernie is doing with AOC to bring people back into the Democratic Progressive Party. Where do you see the future of our country? And how can people find some solace and hope in our future?
Well, I do have to say it's heartening to see the crowds that are showing up for Bernie and AOC. I think they are bringing a message that folks are really, really craving that message. They're craving some clarity, and they're really looking for, I think, a very progressive populist economic message about how, those who are at the top are continue to benefit and are benefiting even more under this new administration, and that we need to sharpen our message and our narrative about who it is that we're fighting for. And Bernie and AOC are making that crystal clear. And I did hear the junior senator from Connecticut on National Public Radio over the weekend, and he spoke about this as well. And he spoke about the fact that we have a obligation to focus on the economic pain that people are feeling and to promote, real viable solutions and alternatives in a way that's really clear and speaks to their needs and speaks to their challenges and their struggles. When we talk about the fact that very few people after college can afford to buy a home, let alone rent an apartment. Rents are so high. College graduates are struggling. It really does, call into question the future of our middle class if people can't navigate after they get out of college in a
But
way
Brian,
that,
I have a question for you because you're a wise man. So, Kamala Harris was giving $25,000 for new homeowners to buy a home, and they were trying to get rid of student loans for folks. I mean, the Democratic Progressive Party is all about taking care of people and making sure that people have a high level of success and comfort in their lives. But we we didn't win.
We didn't win.
So where do you see our country going? Do you feel like there's going to be a turn, and are we going to be able to stop authoritarianism before it really gets ingrained in our country's policies?
I should note, it's often forgotten, the biggest single federal form of subsidy for housing goes to homeowners through the mortgage interest deduction program, and it goes to the top. It's an increasingly valuable subsidy to those at the very top. So just note that most of our housing subsidy goes to people who already own their homes, who get to write off their mortgage interest on their taxes. So
That's
that's like
crazy. That's crazy.
that by far that dwarfs the public subsidy for things like Section 8 and rental assistance and homeless services. It dwarfs all of that. So that's a message that when you sharpen your message and you focus on the economic realities of everyday people, I think we can win all day long when we do that. But we just can't let ourselves get sidetracked, and we have to stay disciplined and focused and really go out and tell this story to people, because the media is not gonna it's not gonna happen anymore. We don't, media, as we know, I mean, we're lucky to have 7 days, but other than that, we don't have a form of local.
We have Vermont Digger, but
Yeah.
so that's very helpful. So to my viewers, ask them. I mean, let us know how they can engage your department and engage the city to learn more about these services to my viewers and how they can be helped.
Sure. We have in Burlington, I think, an incredible legacy of citizen engagement. Citizens expect and deserve to be involved, and we have neighborhood planning assemblies, which I feel are really potential has not been realized. And in the 42 years we've had neighborhood planning assemblies, we still have yet to realize them as the full potential for citizen involvement, grassroots citizen engagement. And we just need folks to lean in locally, because that's where it's at, and we're going to together get through this.
And your office is open for people who want to come in and talk to you. I mean, you're available.
Absolutely.
So to my viewers, uh, just know that CEDO and that department, those folks there are there to help you. So,
Yeah.
you and your wife, Liz Curry, who I mentioned earlier, have been lifetime friends of the city of Burlington, and both of you have devoted your adult lives to making the city what it is today. What is the biggest problem the city of Burlington faces? And what do you think it is?
Well, that's the toughest question, Melinda. I think we have this sort of tripartite scourge of mental illness, substance use disorder, houselessness, all happening in significant ways. And I think we're reeling as a community from folks feeling a sense of not quite sure what to do to turn that around. If you look back, we used to have 30 to 50 people a year, maybe, who are experiencing homelessness. We have over 300 living outside right now. That's in addition to the people living in shelters, people living in the motels. So we have not rebounded and not have figured out as a society how to deal with that issue. And until we realize housing is a human right and we actually deliver on that promise, we're going to continue to
We have
struggle.
so failed. I mean, we've just failed. And, when they talk about all this new housing going up, I mean, they're still so expensive that people can't afford it. Well, anyway, thank you for that. So, what are your words of wisdom for our youth? We're growing up under the shadow of impending authoritarianism, planet devastation, and economic inequality. What hope can you give to them, Brian?
That's a great question. I was just reminded this weekend because I saw a clip of our dear mayor Bernie in the 80s, when a national reporter, I forget, one of those talking heads at the national level in the 1980s, had Bernie on, and they asked him, "Don't you really believe that capitalism is the ultimate solution to all these problems?" And Bernie said, "No, actually, I don't." And the reason why, Bernie said, is if we're constantly going after each other and competing for everything, we've ignored the other side of that equation, is cooperation. I think humans together can accomplish so much more than when we're constantly dog eat dog, one person for themselves. And once we realize that we have a shared destiny and we have shared interests, we can accomplish truly amazing things. And I think young people inherently know that. I think young people come into this discussion instinctively knowing that. And that's why they're always on the cutting edge of social change.
Thank God for our youth. Now we have Doge eating Doge, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a tough time right now. So Brian, I just want to thank you so much for the years, for the 40 some years that you have been in the city, really making some incredible changes with all your cohorts. And I want to just thank you for your service to the city. You are a remarkable man, and I'm honored to call you my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. I'm grateful to be part of your circle. And as I like to say, we're part of the conspiracy of goodwill.
Yes, we are, and we will be until the end of our days.
Yes.
And to my viewers, I want to thank you for joining me and to let you know that I will see you shortly. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye-bye.